We always try to keep our viewers up to date, and of course, as you know, there's more and more interest in recycling. And today I want to show you a way that you can recycle some organic scraps from your kitchen and maybe even reduce the volume of garbage scraps by as much as 25%, and it's with the process called vermicomposting. And let me tell you what vermiculture means. It means really raising earthworms in a controlled environment. So vermicomposting would mean composting organic material using earthworms in a controlled environment, and I want to show you how you can do that. And of course, the first thing would be to have what is called a worm bin or a container. Now you can just go and get a plastic container and drill holes in the bottom and make do with that, but of course there's always some kits out on the market, and this particular one is from the Natural Gardening Company, and it's a high density polyethylene, and of course it has a lid on it that snaps down, and you can see it's a very shallow container, and there's some rubber feet at the bottom that kind of hold it up from a tray that's at the bottom, and the tray is what holds the compost tea that comes out of the holes in the bottom that you can kind of recycle there. But inside you'll see that there's foam that comes with it, and the foam is actually to allow drainage from the compost mix and keep the earthworms in. And then you'll get a piece of black plastic, and that's to keep the light out and also hold moisture. So that kit itself comes complete set, about $70, and it's mail order, and of course there's shipping and handling on that. Now that may be a little expensive for some people who wanted to get into this, and one of our ambassadors, Olin Thomas, who's very handy with woodworking, took a diagram of a composter using plywood, and he adapted it and made this one for us, and it's about 4 square feet as well, but it has hinges for the lid, and then we just used a trash bag for our cover, and we don't have any foam in the bottom. They're just holes in the bottom again to allow drainage. He has some handles on the side for us to carry it, and that's a pretty sturdy one, and we guess it probably cost anywhere from $15 to $20 just with the wood and hardware and the materials, not counting labor, of course. So the main thing to keep in mind is just to use containers that are shallow, anywhere from say 8 to 16, 18, 20 inches. You really wouldn't want to use anything deep like a trash can. The shallower the better, and that's because of the worms, the types of worms that we're going to use. And again, drainage is very important. Now, there is a recipe that tells you how much compost or garbage scraps a week that you generate. Depends on the size of container as far as the square footage of it, and usually it's about 1 square feet of container for a pound of garbage generated per week. So with this being 4 square feet, you could get by with composting 3.5 to 4 pounds of garbage in that. Now the next thing would be the bedding material, and the bedding material can be anything from shredded up newspapers, and you can just recycle your newspapers and shred them up, or the ends of the edges of the computer paper makes great bedding material for them, or just shredded paper in general. Also, you can use composted manure and also shredded corrugated cardboard. Now in this particular one, let me show you what we've used. It's peat moss, and that works real nicely too. And you can tell that's just regular Canadian peat moss, and we just keep it moist and put that right on top, and you can see it's pretty shallow right now because we'll add layers. The one over here is really more of a potting soil mix, because you'll see some perlite in it and peat, pretty heavy with peat moss again, but that's more of a traditional potting soil mix. So those are the types of bedding materials that you can use. Now the next thing, obviously, with vermicomposting, you need the critters that are going to do the actual composting. And it's very different from most of the things you think about. We're talking about red worms here, and there's a particular genus species that I want to give you. It's called Eisenia fotida, and that's on the screen there for you to see the spelling, but it has to be this particular kind of red worm because they are adapted to these kinds of conditions. They're also called red wigglers, manure worms, fish worms, or stink worms, and you can also find a little different strain of the red worm called Lumbricus rubellus, which is a little bit more soil dwelling, but those are the only two that you really want to use. Now, you don't want to use night crawlers or the big earthworms that we have a tendency to find in our traditional garden soils, like in raised beds or around your compost piles outside. They're much bigger, and that's the key to the earthworm composting. And let me see if I can't show you some here, how small they are. And we'll dig in this particular one and see if we can't find some for you. And when you order these, we tried to find some from our bait shops here in town, and they couldn't find them for us, so we had to mail order them, and a pound of them were about $20, but you get the eggs in the different stages, so that's pretty much a mature one right there, and you'll get much smaller ones, and they continue to reproduce. So it's the red wigglers or the red worms in condition or combination with the microorganisms that are breaking down the organic matter. And that's the next thing that we need to talk about. Any kind of table scraps, especially like fruit peelings, vegetable peelings, eggshells, coffee grinds, peelings, lettuce, those types of things, even table scraps, you can scrape them off the plates. The things you'd want to avoid though would be like meat and bones, because they're more greasy, takes longer to compost, and also it has a problem in adding the odor to the compost. You wouldn't want to use anything like glass or plastic. And they also recommend that you don't put any like big pieces of branches or twigs in, because this is not meant to be for the composting outside. This is strictly for table scraps and those types of things. The other thing that I want to tell you about on the worm ratio is, once you get your container size and you figured out how much compost scraps you're putting in, you need about a pound of worms to a half pound daily garbage, and that kind of gives you a recipe to go by. Now, once you get it completed, you want to put plastic over it again to keep it cool and the moisture in, and you can see this one is beginning to dry out along the sides, and you want to keep it damp but not soggy, and you can just use a watering can and just water it occasionally to keep it again damp. This keeps the light out and the moisture in, and the crawlers will come to the surface, and when you add the scraps, it's always a good idea to bury it a little bit too, and then place it in a cool location. You don't want to put it in full sun. The worms will actually tolerate 40 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, but they're most active in composting at 55 to 75. So that can be under a shade tree, on your porch, out of the sun. Some people even do these inside in basements, in your utility room, some even under the sink, under the kitchen. So it kind of would depend on your particular interest. Now, if you are successful in this, you'll be able to harvest some of the compost in 6 to 8 weeks, use it for potting soil or to improve your soil beds, and there's ways to keep the worms in there so you would continue to recycle and use the worms time after time. But if you're kind of squirmy about this, there are a lot of people into vermicomposting, and there's a lot of references. There's a book called Worms Eat My Garbage, and this particular book has sold over 50,000 copies already, and it tells you everything you need to know about vermicomposting. There's even a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter called the Worm Digest out of Oregon. That's very popular. And even for the kids who like to get into this, there is a newsletter called the Squirmy Wormy Composters. So it's just for the kids, projects to get them involved in earthworms and composting as well. So again, if you want to try your hand at it, you can see there's a lot of support material out there, and really the sky's the limit on how you develop it, but there's the basic requirements just like composting outside.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.